Dan Novak.
This is VOA News, reporting by remote. I'm Joe Ramsey. Shelling has resumed around Ukraine's huge nuclear power plant. Russian and Ukrainian officials blamed each other. The attacks Wednesday come a day after the UN Atomic Watchdog Agency pressed for the warring sides to carve out a safe zone at the plant to prevent a catastrophe. A Ukrainian regional governor said Russians fired on a city on the opposite bank of the Dnieper River from the plant. Russian authorities said the city where the power plant is located is in a blackout because Ukrainian shelling damaged a power substation. In the east and south, Ukrainian officials reported progress in their counteroffensive. Russian President Vladimir Putin has hit out against the West, saying Russia will press on in Ukraine. AP correspondent Charles de Ledesma reports.
Speaking in Vladivostok, Putin says Moscow will press on with its military action in Ukraine until reaching its goals, and mocked Western attempts to drive Russia into a corner with sanctions. He also scoffed at Western attempts to cap prices for Russian oil and gas, calling the idea stupid and saying that Russia will have enough customers in Asia anyway. Putin adds, the demand is so high on global markets that we won't have any problem selling it. I'm Charles de Ledesma.
Putin and Chinese President Xi Jinping are expected to meet next week in Uzbekistan for talks that could signal warming relations between two powers that are increasingly facing off against the West. The meeting at a political, economic, and security forum comes at delicate times for both leaders, and it would be their second face-to-face talk this year. Find more at voanews.com. This is VOA News. Canadian police on Wednesday arrested a man suspected in the weekend stabbing spree that killed 10 people in and around an indigenous tribal reserve in Saskatchewan, ending a 4-day manhunt. Miles Sanderson, a 30-year-old, was taken into custody in the town of Rosthern, Saskatchewan, about 100 kilometers southwest of the area where the killings occurred on Sunday. His older brother and accused accomplice, Damian Sanderson, 31, was himself found slain on Monday, a day after the stabbing rampage in a grassy area of the James Smith Cree Nation. 18 other people were wounded in the rampage, which ranks among the deadliest attacks in Canada's modern history and has rattled a country unaccustomed to mass acts of violence. The White House says Vice President Kamala Harris will lead the U.S. delegation to the state funeral of former Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe later this month. Harris will also visit South Korea. It will be Harris's first official visits to both countries since taking office last year. Abe was shot to death in July on a street in western Japan by a gunman who opened fire on him from behind as he delivered a campaign speech. The Obamas have returned to the White House for the unveiling of their official portraits. AP Washington correspondent Sagar Magani reports.
Barack and Michelle, welcome home.
President Biden hosted the ceremony for his former boss.
There are few people I've ever known with more integrity, decency, and moral courage than Barack Obama.
His portrait by Robert McCurdy shows him in a black suit, standing expressionless against a white background. Obama says Sharon Sprung captured everything he loves about his wife.
Her grace, her intelligence, and the fact that she's fine.
It was Michelle Obama's first White House visit since moving out.
A girl like me, she was never supposed to be up there next to Jacqueline Kennedy and Dolly Madison.
And says future generations seeing the portrait should know they too can achieve big things. Sagar Magani, Washington.
Recapping our top story, shelling has resumed around Ukraine's huge nuclear power plant. Russian and Ukrainian officials blamed each other. The attacks Wednesday come a day after the UN Atomic Watchdog Agency pressed for the warring sides to carve out a safe zone at the plant to prevent a catastrophe. Find more on these stories on our website, voanews.com. Reporting by remote, I'm Joe Ramsey.
This is VOA News. Via remote, I'm Marissa Melton. The United States mourned the death of Great Britain's longest-serving monarch Thursday, just a few hours after the news was announced that Queen Elizabeth II of Great Britain died earlier today. Presidents and politicians acknowledged the singular life and achievements of the UK's longest-serving monarch. U.S. President Joe Biden and First Lady Jill Biden have released a statement mourning her passing. The statement came swiftly following the announcement of her death. It said the Queen defined an era and was a steadying presence in a world of constant change. Former President Barack Obama and his wife Michelle Obama also remembered the Queen in a statement Thursday praising her dedicated leadership and tireless, dignified public service. The Queen worked with 14 U.S. presidents during her 70 years on the throne. VOA's Diane Roberts has more on the life of Queen Elizabeth II.
Much of its old empire. Queen Elizabeth II was also the world's oldest and longest-serving head of state. She came to the throne following the death of her father, King George VI, on February 6, 1952, when she was just 25 years old. She became the monarch at a time when Britain still retained much of its old empire. It was emerging from the ravages of World War II, with food rationing still in force and class and privilege still dominant in society. In the decades that followed, Elizabeth witnessed massive political change and social upheaval at home and abroad, while remaining an enduring symbol of stability and continuity for Britons. At a time of relative national economic decline, Elizabeth also tried to adapt the ancient institution of monarchy to the demands of the modern era.
This is VOA News. The Biden administration is making a show of force in Europe as it boosts aid for Ukraine. AP Washington correspondent Sagar Meghani reports.
Its top diplomat is in Kyiv, its defense chief in Germany, both announcing major new military aid for Ukraine and other nations whom Russia is threatening. On an unannounced visit to the Ukrainian capital, Secretary of State Antony Blinken said the administration has told Congress it intends to give $2 billion in long-term financing to 19 nations most potentially at risk of Russian aggression. Earlier at a German airbase,
the war is at another key moment.
Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin announced a $675 million package of heavy weaponry for Ukraine. The U.S. has now allotted more than $15 billion in aid to the country since President Biden took office. Sagar Meghani, Washington.
Washington, D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser on Thursday declared a public emergency over buses of migrants sent by Republican governors from the U.S.-Mexico border states of Texas and Arizona. Bowser, a Democrat, issued an order to support arriving migrants by creating a new Office of Migrant Services. She'll devote $10 million to launch the office. The city will seek reimbursement from the federal government. Texas Governor Greg Abbott has sent more than 7,900 migrants to Washington, D.C. since April in an effort to push responsibility for border crossers to the Democrats, including U.S. President Joe Biden. Arizona has sent about 1,700 migrants. Texas has also sent more than 2,200 migrants to New York City and 300 to Chicago, although some get off the buses in other U.S. states before reaching those cities. Bowser's office has called the busing a political stunt. It's a sentiment echoed by the White House and Democratic mayors of New York City and Chicago. The Justice Department is appealing a judge's decision to name an independent arbiter to review records seized by the FBI from former President Donald Trump's Florida home. The department has also asked a U.S. district judge to put on hold her directive prohibiting it from using the seized records for investigative purposes while it contests her ruling to a federal appeals court. The judge's order has the likely impact of slowing the pace of the investigation into the presence of classified documents at Mar-a-Lago. Law enforcement officials said in a filing Thursday they would suffer irreparable harm if the directive remains in place. And our top story again this hour, the United States is mourning the death of Great Britain's longest-serving monarch, Queen Elizabeth II. Via remote, I'm Marissa.
Around the world. I'm Ashley Thompson.
And I'm Dan Novak.
This is VOA News. Via remote, I'm Marissa Melton. A service of remembrance was held at St. Paul's Cathedral in London on Friday for Queen Elizabeth II, who died Thursday at age 96. AP's Ed Donahue has more.
Bishop Sarah Mullally said a life lived in the service of others is a rare jewel.
It is a jewel that Her late Majesty the Queen wore as a crown.
Mullally called the Queen a symbol of unity, strength, forbearance, and resilience.
She has been this nation's unerring heartbeat through times of progress, joy, and celebration, as well as in much darker and more difficult seasons.
Mullally prayed that the Queen's words over the years can be a reminder of the power and strength that can be found in coming together. I'm Ed Donahue.
U.S. President Joe Biden delivered a forceful message at a Democratic National Committee reception Thursday outlining his administration's accomplishments and launching verbal attacks against loyalists of former President Donald Trump. It's a strategy his aides believe to be the winning ticket to maintain the Democrats' slim majority in Congress in the November midterm elections. In his comments, Biden acknowledged that not every Republican is a Trump supporter. He said Democrats, independents, and mainstream Republicans can choose a different path to a future of unity and hope and some optimism. Shelling has destroyed the power infrastructure at the Ukrainian city of Enerhodar, where the staff operating the Russian-held Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant live, posing a growing threat to the plant. This, according to the United Nations Nuclear Watchdog Agency on Friday. This is VOA News. Dozens of civilians were killed this week in a northern Malian town attacked by jihadists affiliated with the Islamic State group. That's according to a local elected official and the leader of an armed group, speaking to the French news agency on Friday. It was the first time the town of Talatay has been attacked on such a scale by the group Islamic State in the Greater Sahara. On Tuesday, the jihadists fought a fierce battle with rivals from an al-Qaeda-affiliated group and others. According to sources who spoke to the French news agency, they said the fighters emerged from the bush on motorbikes and took control of the town Tuesday evening after more than 3 hours of fighting. The situation on the ground remains unclear. A local official said 45 civilians were killed. A militant leader put the civilian death toll at 30. Poliovirus has been detected in more wastewater near New York City. AP correspondent Norman Hall has more.
New York Governor Kathy Hochul says the state is stepping up its polio fighting efforts because the life-threatening virus was detected in the wastewater of yet another county in the New York City area. Health officials began checking for signs of the virus in sewage water, and the first case of polio in the United States in nearly a decade was identified in July in Rockland County, which is north of the city. The latest detection involved a wastewater sample collected last month in Nassau County on Long Island, directly east of the city. State health officials say the sample is genetically linked to the polio case from Rockland and provides further evidence of expanding community spread. I'm Norman Hall.
A supporter of far-right Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro stabbed to death a backer of leftist former President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, also known as Lula. Authorities said on Friday, in the latest example of rising political tensions ahead of the upcoming election. The violence happened in the west-central state of Mato Grosso after tempers frayed during an argument over support for the two candidates. Bolsonaro trails Lula in the polls in an election riven by intense polarization. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken announced sanctions Friday against Iran's Ministry of Intelligence and Security for a cyber attack launched against Albania's government computer systems in July. In a separate statement, the U.S. Treasury Department said Iran is also behind the leaking of documents purported to be from the Albanian government and personal information associated with Albanian residents. Under the sanctions, the Treasury Department said all property and interest in property belonging to Tehran's Intelligence and Security Ministry that are subject to U.S. jurisdiction are blocked, and U.S. citizens are prohibited from engaging in transactions with them. Via remote, I'm Marissa